Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. It's time, once again, for another depressing dose of dismal Disney. Whether we want it or not, the fifth installment of Indiana Jones is upon us. Starring an aging Harrison Ford once again reprising the titular character complete with his trademark leather jacket and brown fedora, the film premiered early at the Cannes Film Festival in France on Thursday night, which is well over a month before the film's scheduled theatrical release on June 30th for general audiences. But Disney spared no expense as it jetted the top executives, including CEO Bob Iger and Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy, to the south of France for the summer action film that was directed by James Mangold and also stars Phoebe WallerBridge. But when the credits rolled, Cannes mustered a muted standing ovation for Indy's latest adventure. Yes, the applause lasted for 5 minutes, but by Cannes standards, that's more of a polite formality. In other words, they didn't really like it. But regardless of how the crowd felt about the film, the biggest cheers of the night were reserved for Harrison Ford. The actor arrived on the carpet with wife Callista Flockhart, and an announcer introduced the duo as Indiana Jones and Callista Flockhart. Ford received a true movie star's welcome, as thousands of fans screamed his name and the audience at the Palais jumped up to welcome him as he set foot inside the theater. As the night began, Ford was summoned to the stage by Cannes Festival director Terry Fremont to receive a surprise Palme d'Or after a reel of his greatest roles from Star Wars to The Fugitive played on screen. "I'm very moved by this," Ford said. "They say when you're about to die, you see your life flash before your eyes, and I just saw my life flash before my eyes. A great part of my life, but not all of my life. My life has been enabled by my lovely wife, who has supported my passion and my dreams, and I'm grateful." Then Ford addressed the audience. "I love you too, but I've got a movie you ought to see. It's right behind me. So let me get out of the way and thank you again for this great honor." Indeed, the standing ovations for Ford were louder before the movie played. That's really not a good sign, is it? The film's elaborate action scenes and witty one-liners delivered by WallerBridge received a less than rapturous response inside the theater. During parts of the 142-minute film, which means it's almost 2.5 hours long, audience members could be heard whispering out of boredom in French. You mean people weren't embracing Kathleen Kennedy's latest film and its reported $294.7 million production budget? If we multiply that by 2.5 to estimate the film's break-even point, we get a figure of around $736.8 million to account for the 50% of gross ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget. Given that the last Indiana Jones movie, 2008's Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, only earned $786.6 million globally, this fifth installment may need around at least that much just to break even. But if the film's break-even point is closer to 3 times the movie's production budget, that could put it closer to $884 million. What that essentially says is that Indiana Jones 5 may need to earn around $900 million in order to break even. And that would be an all-time box office record for the franchise if it can actually manage to do that. But I'm very skeptical about this movie's ability to earn that much money given its lackluster premiere at Cannes. And we have to bear in mind that this is the first Indiana Jones film that wasn't directed by Steven Spielberg, though he and George Lucas did executively produce the film, but that appears to be the extent of their involvement. James Mangold, who directed The Wolverine and Ford v Ferrari, took over filmmaking duties on Dial of Destiny. And yes, I have heard a few sarcastically refer to this movie as Dildo of Destiny. Spielberg said during a press conference in April that he loved the latest sequel, saying, Bob Iger had a screening for a lot of the Disney executives, and I came to the screening along with the director James Mangold. Everybody loved the movie. It's really, really a good Indiana Jones film. I'm really proud of what Jim has done with it. A screening in front of Disney executives who answer to Bob Iger doesn't exactly sound particularly impartial, now does it? But what do the critics think of it right now? Surprisingly, instead of being blocked out until a few days before opening, the critics' reviews are already available on Rotten Tomatoes. Clearly, Bob Iger and Kathleen Kennedy were anticipating rave reviews for this fifth Indiana Jones movie. But the tomato meter on Rotten Tomatoes has been hovering around 43% to 52% as more reviews appear. Currently, with 29 reviews as of the time that I'm recording this video, the tomato meter is at 52%. And that 52% means that the overall critics' ratings for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny are rotten. This is not a particularly good sign for a movie that may need to earn as much as $900 million to break even. Now, while it's possible that general audiences may enjoy the movie more than the critics appear to be, the audience at Cannes wasn't impressed, and not everyone in the audience at Cannes was a critic. Let's take a look at what one critic wrote about the movie. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is a dutifully eager but ultimately rather joyless piece of nostalgic hokum. It's the fifth installment of the Indiana Jones franchise, and though it has its quota of relentless action, it rarely tries to match, let alone top, the ingeniously staged kinematic bravura of Raiders of the Lost Ark. How could it? Raiders, whatever one thinks of it as a movie, is arguably one of the most influential blockbusters of the last 45 years, and in the opinion of the reviewer, even more so than Star Wars. Back in 1977, George Lucas took us through the looking glass at what would become our all-fantasy, all-the-time movie culture. But it was Steven Spielberg, teaming up with Lucas in Raiders, who introduced the structural DNA of the one thing after another action movie as endless set-piece escapist machine. And that's a true statement. This means that Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny isn't just coming after 4 previous Indiana Jones films. It's coming after 4 decades of high-priced Hollywood action decadence, from the Fast and Furious series to the Mission Impossible, Terminator, Lara Croft, Transformers, and latter-day Bond films, not to mention the Marvel space operas, all of which owe a boundless debt to the aggro zap of the Raiders aesthetic. And that's all very true. Spielberg and Lucas are still on board as executive producers, but Spielberg in The Dial of Destiny has handed off the directorial reins to James Mangold, who has mostly been a gifted mainstream dramatist, though he honed his action chops on The Wolverine and Logan. So while Mangold knows his way around the fanciful blockbuster artillery, his direction of The Dial of Destiny has a competent craft, but not much in the way of exhilaration. And that's not obviously a good sign, now is it? Working from a script he co-wrote with Jez and John Henry Butterworth and David Cope, Mangold opens the movie with an extended prologue that's set in Germany near the end of World War II, in which Indy, played by a CGI-de-aged Harrison Ford, attempts to get his hands on the Lance of Longinus, which is supposed to be the knife used to draw Christ's blood, only to learn that the blade in question is a fake. So instead, he sets his sights on the Antikythera, which is a handheld contraption of ancient gold meshed gears that is one half of the dial created by the Greek mathematician Archimedes in the 3rd century BCE. It will be the artifact gizmo MacGuffin that hovers over the entire movie, and the characters never stop talking about it. And that could get old fast. In the prologue, Indy is racing to get a hold of the device before Jurgen Voller, as played by Mads Mikkelsen, who is a mad dog Nazi scientist and who wants to steal the device for himself. Mangold does a winning homage to the playful rhythms of early 80s Spielberg, as Indy disentangles his neck from a hanging noose and finds himself in a car versus motorcycle chase, only to wind up along with his British archaeologist associate Basil Shaw, as played by Toby Jones, dueling with Voller on top of a speeding train. Have you ever seen an action sequence set atop a speeding train? We've all seen about 10,000 of them, and this one, while efficiently executed, is brought off with just enough CGI that you can see the digital seams. It's worth noting how audacious the action sequences in Raiders of the Lost Ark were, a sensation that was expanded upon in the darker, spookier, and unfairly maligned Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. But by the late 80s, when Spielberg gave us Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, as A-OK as that movie was, it was already, except for Sean Connery, a revamp on autopilot. And 2008's Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was the rehash of the revamp, reducing Indy's antics to a tepid formula. After Indy and Basil leap off that train into a river and retrieve the Antikythera, though the other half of it must still be found, the film cuts to 1969, where Indy himself is now a relic, an old man living in a cruddy New York apartment, waking up to his hippie neighbors blasting Magical Mystery Tour, pouring a shot of whiskey into his instant coffee as he glances over his divorce papers. Mangold sketches the period well so that it can stand in to signify the idea that Professor Henry Indiana Jones has been yanked into the modern world, where he's teaching at Hunter College and getting ready to retire. Having kept his half of the Antikythera hidden in the archaeology stacks, his goddaughter, Helen Shaw, as played by Phoebe WallerBridge, shows up, but they haven't seen each other for 18 years. She announces that she's an archaeologist too and would like to team up with Indy to locate the other half of the Antikythera, but she has mercenary motives. And while Phoebe Waller-Bridge makes her character saucy, spiky, and duplicitous in a cheeky way, we never feel in our guts that Helena is a chip off of the old Indy block. So while it feels like the film is setting her up to become the new Indiana Jones, that seems very unlikely. In the meantime, Voller, the Nazi foe, hasn't gone away. He was apparently drafted into NASA, where he spearheaded the scientific innovations that drove the Apollo moon landing, which makes him a riff on Werner von Braun and the other ex-Nazis that the US tapped to help invent the space program. But Mads Mikkelsen, with his lizard scowl and his shiny metallic hair, doesn't play Voller as a realistic character. He's a leering megalomaniac out of central casting. Indy and Helena go after the Graphikos, which is the missing other half of the Antikythera. It's a journey that will take them from New York to Tangiers, where Helena tries to unload the piece they already have at an auction for stolen artifacts. Then it's on to Greece and Sicily to caves and ruins and giant wriggling caterpillars. Naturally, Voller is right behind them with 3 thugs of his own. There's a chase through a ticker tape parade for the Apollo 11 astronauts, with Indy leaping absurdly onto a police horse and riding it into the subway, and a car chase through Tangiers with Indy driving a 3-wheel taxi. And now for the review's conclusion. But those early high points aren't really followed through. Mostly, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny works by translating Indy's old daredevil kick-ass fervor into the pure will with which he's now hunting for the artifact. As the film leaps into international locations, the action starts to feel more conventional and less like Indiana Jones. The reason that the Antikythera MacGuffin is so valuable is that it can create fissures in time, presumably so that it can allow one to theoretically travel through time. The film actually tests this out with spectacularly preposterous results. But time travel in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is really an unconscious metaphor, since it's the movie that wants to go back in time, completing our love affair with the defining action movie star role of Harrison Ford. In the abstract, at least, it accomplishes that, right down to the emotional diagram of a touching finale. But only by reminding you that even if you restage the action ethos of the past, recapturing the thrill is much harder. Does this sound like a movie that can earn $900 million at the box office? Well, something else that's going to hinder Kathleen Kennedy's box office dreams for Indiana Jones 5 is a film that's going to be opening only 12 days later, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1, starring Tom Cruise. And Tom Cruise's previous movie of Top Gun: Maverick was one of the biggest movies of 2022. Will Kathleen Kennedy's Indiana Jones 5 movie be able to stand up to Tom Cruise? I doubt it. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to see more of our videos in the future and help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.